The calendar says, December 25. The manger scenes glow, the carols rise, the cocoa steams, and every nativity set ever sold agrees that this is the moment. Then a quiet detail lands like a pebble in a still pond. The Bible never names the day, not the month, not even the season. It gives places, rulers, names, signs in the sky, and the smell of a stable. It gives shepherds out at night and a family traveling for a census under a paranoid king named Herod. It gives everything except a date. The single most famous birthday on earth sits without a calendar stamp. That realization does not dim the wonder. It sharpens it. Suddenly the story is not pinned to a single square on a wall calendar. It stretches across empires and calendars and old scrolls. It threads through Roman festivals and Jewish priestly schedules, and debates in the smoky light of ancient scriptoria. It invites a hunt. Luke sets the scene with grounded detail. Mary and Joseph head to Bethlehem because of a census. Shepherds spend the night outside with their flocks. The child is laid in a manger because there was no guest room. All of this lands in real geography and real administration. And then the second gospel angle arrives. Matthew sketches wise men from the east, following a strange star to Jerusalem and then to Bethlehem. End quote. He anchors the moment to a tyrant who orders a massacre in the small town. The family escapes to Egypt. When it is safe to return, they settle in Nazareth under Herod's son Archelaus. It reads like a map and a timeline. That is exactly what historians squeeze for clues. The shadows of a date hide under terms like Quirinius, Saturnalia, Sol Invictus, Abijah, and the triple conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. Each piece is a breadcrumb. The trail does not march in one straight line. It branches. It doubles back. It even loops. But the convergences are electrifying. The first branch comes with festival fires. Rome loved a party. December in the capital city burned with Saturnalia. The week-long carnival beginning on December 17. The city went topsy-turvy. Masters served slaves. Schools shut down. Gifts changed hands. Laurel and pine filled doorways. A constant hum of laughter and drinking filled the streets. After Saturnalia came the Kalends of January celebrations, a blur of noise and greenery leading into the new year. Then, in the year 274, Emperor Aurelian introduced a new focus. He elevated Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, to imperial star power and set a flashy celebration on December 25. The sun's rebirth after the solstice fused with imperial might. In the century that followed, Roman almanacs listed December 25 as the Natalis Invicti, the birth of the unconquered. The Roman calendar was not the only page turning. In Christian gatherings scattered through the empire, the birth of Christ slowly took pride of place, but not yet on every December 25. In Egyptian sources, near the year 200, a Christian teacher named Clement of Alexandria noted believers proposing dates like April 19 or May 20 for the Nativity. Others in the East gathered on January 6 to mark the manifestation of Christ, combining the Nativity and the baptism into one great feast known as Theophany. No single date ruled. By the mid-4th century in Rome, though, a particular line appears in a lavish illustrated book produced in 354. The chronography of 354 includes the Philocalian calendar, a who's who, what's what, and when's when of Roman life. On December 25, one entry says, Natalis Invicti. Another entry, in a different section listing Christian feasts, declares that Christ was born in Bethlehem of Judea on the 8th day before the Kalends of January. December 2017. In Roman reckoning, the two lines sit pages apart. The unconquered sun celebrated in one column, the birth of Christ recorded in another. The air thickens with meaning. Some readers see a Christian takeover. The Christians claim the sun's day with the sun's birth. Others trace a parallel stream in Christian thought that lands on December 25 without borrowing. Both streams flow at once. That double flow is where the shock sits like a live wire, because long before the chronography of 354, Christians were measuring time with theology. A thread in Jewish tradition held that great prophets lived out a perfect measure of life, dying on the same calendar date as their conception. Early Christian writers latched on to that rhythm in the story of Jesus. Western calculators fixed the crucifixion on March 25 in the Roman calendar, a date that often corresponded to 14 Nisan in the Jewish year. That convergence gained a symbolic shine. March 25 became not only the day of death, but also the day of conception. 9 months after March 25 lands firmly on December 25. The date is not a winter carnival bled into Christianity. It is a conception-based countdown. An independent rationale existed. In the East, a similar computation used April 6 as the date of the crucifixion, and thus the conception, counting forward 9 months to reach January 6 for the Nativity. That Eastern rhythm explains why the Armenian Church to this day celebrates the birth and manifestation of Christ on January 6. 2 calendars, one underlying logic, different landing pads. And then there is a much older hint. An early 3rd century commentary, attributed to Hippolytus of Rome, places the birth of Christ on December 22-5. The text is thorny and scholars argue about layers and later edits. Even so, Roman Christians were not unaware of December 25 long before Aurelian's Sol Invictus festival was set in stone. That counters the tidy one-way borrowing claim. It is more textured than a single arrow pointing from pagan Rome to Christian Rome. But cold air and shepherds tug the argument in the other direction. December nights in Judah turn chilly. Rains soak the hills. Flocks often spend winter under cover. Luke's shepherds are outdoors at night as lambs doze on open grass under real stars. That detail pushes some investigators away from December. It pushes them toward another path that starts in the temple in Jerusalem. Luke names a priest, Zechariah, who belongs to the division of Abijah. While he is serving in the sanctuary offering incense, he learns that his wife Elizabeth will conceive and bear John the Baptist. The priestly divisions described in 174 formed a rota of 24 courses, each serving for a week, with all priests serving at major festivals. The division of Abijah appears 8th on the list. The argument goes like this. If Zechariah served at a predictable time in the year, and Elizabeth conceives shortly after, and Mary conceives 6 months later, and a full-term pregnancy averages 9 months, a timeline emerges. Many reconstructions place John's birth around the time of Passover in the spring, and Jesus' birth around the autumn harvest festivals, often near Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. The idea crackles with symbolism because the Gospel of John says the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. The language ties the incarnation to the tabernacle imagery, and the fall festival setting fits like a hand in a glove. The trouble sits in the calendar engine. The temple rota did not run on a simple modern schedule. Jewish months were lunar. Intercalation adjusted the year. The cycle of 24 courses repeated twice each year, with interruptions for pilgrim feasts, where all priests served. Scholarly reconstructions use Qumran Mishmarot texts, astronomical models, and historical anchors. The calculations are savvy and creative, but they come with margin lines. A small shift in starting assumptions reroutes the destination. Some calculations yield a spring birth. Others highlight late summer. Many lean toward September or October. None lock in December. Right at this tension point, another detail from Luke takes the stage. Luke says the census happened while Quirinius was governing Syria. The most famous census carried out by Publius Sulpicius Quirinius took place in 6 to 7 CE, after Herod Archelaus was deposed, and Judea became a Roman province. That date sits a decade after Herod the Great, the tyrant in Matthew's nativity narrative, who died before a spring Passover, associated with a lunar eclipse. The tension looks like a historical collision. The line is not simple. Scholars have tried multiple fixes. Some suggest an earlier administrative role for Quirinius, perhaps overseeing military affairs in Syria before the formal governorship, with a registration ordered earlier under Augustus. Others adjust the translation of Luke's phrase to read that the census was the first registration before Quirinius governed Syria, pulling the event back in time. Ancient papyri from Egypt show that periodic enrollments across the empire happened locally at different times. That background makes a Bethlehem trip in the final years of Herod the Great plausible, without forcing Luke into the 6 CE census window. The evidence forms a net, not a straight arrow. Luke and Matthew can be read in a tight braid, and then the sky opens. Astronomers and chronologers have scanned the records for clues to the famous star that guided Eastern Magi. Multiple candidates cast their glow. In 7 BCE, Jupiter and Saturn performed a triple conjunction in the constellation Pisces, with 3 close passings visible to trained eyes across the year. The triple pass has strong symbolic weight in ancient astrological systems. In 3-2 BCE, Jupiter and the star Regulus, the king star in the constellation Leo, formed a series of close conjunctions, with Jupiter appearing to circle and crown Regulus. In June of 2 BCE, Jupiter and Venus raced together so closely that they appeared as a single brilliant light in the western sky just after sunset. Chinese and Korean records note a comet or nova around 5 BCE, a long-tailed object that hung in the sky for weeks. The Matthew account describes a star that rose, moved, and then stood over the place, the kind of language that fits the way ancient observers talked about planetary motions and stationary points. Each phenomenon fits part of the description. Each points to the years before 4 BCE, or around 3-2 BCE. The timeline remains flexible within that range. Herod's death anchors the lower bound. Josephus ties it to an eclipse before Passover. The widely accepted candidate is the partial lunar eclipse on March 13, 4 BCE, followed by a Passover on April 11. Another candidate is the total eclipse on January 10, 1 BCE, leaving a shorter runway to Passover in April of that year. Assessments of Josephus's events between the death and Passover weigh in. The 4 BCE date has dominated modern histories. The 1 BCE date has living defenders who assemble tight chronologies and coin evidence. The birth of Jesus fits into that window a few years before the death of Herod. That places the Nativity most plausibly between 7 and 4 BCE, if one holds to the 4 BCE death, or closer to 3, or 2 BCE, under the 1 BCE view. December 25 can land inside those years, but so can September, October, or other months. The sky does not crown a single date. Nothing in the biblical text demands a winter night. Nothing forbids it. Shepherding patterns matter. Bethlehem sits on limestone hills at roughly the same latitude as Dallas or Casablanca, with winter nights that can be cold and wet. Many flocks came in from the fields during the rainy months, yet flocks kept for temple sacrifices near Bethlehem could stay out year-round, watched by shepherds trained for that purpose around Migdal Eder, the tower of the flock. The lambing season peaks in early spring. Some shepherding takes place deep into winter all the same. Luke's detail about shepherds outdoors at night does not function as a calendar stamp. It adds texture, not a date. Then, the Roman layer returns with fresh force. Emperor Aurelian dedicates a temple to Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, in 274. He casts the sun as patron of the empire and brands December 25 as a spectacular birthday festival for the sun. The images are golden and bold. Priests in fiery robes, rays carved in stone, the sun disk riding triumphantly through mosaic skies. The winter solstice already occupied the imaginations of the ancient world. The sun's lowest arc turns. The light begins to grow again. Fire and evergreens shout resilience. In that environment, Christians gather, confessing that the true light has come into the world. The resonance hums at once harmonious and defiant. By 336, within the calendar preserved by the chronography of 354, the Church in Rome lists the Nativity on December 25. A few pages of that treasure also show the pagan festival for the unconquered sun on the same date. Some readers imagine a triumphant replacement, the Church laying a new feast on top of the old. Others hear an independent theological drumbeat already ringing December 25, the conception and crucifixion calculation, working 9 months back from March 25, well before Aurelian's temple. Both readings stand with evidence. Both trace real gravitational pulls in late antique culture. The Church Fathers speak in many voices. Origen, preaching in the 3rd century, mocked the practice of celebrating birthdays as a custom of Pharaoh and Herod, not of the righteous. It was not a contempt for the birth of Christ. It was a comment on human pride. Early Christians focused on the day of martyrdom, the moment of faithful completion. In that atmosphere, exact birth dates did not draw attention. Clement of Alexandria preserved a list of possible birth dates in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, none of which were December 25. Hippolytus gives the December 25 date in his Daniel commentary, though scholars debate its textual history. By the late 4th century, John Chrysostom, preaching in Antioch around 386, argued in favor of December 25 with energy, pointing to the Roman census archives and the timing of the priestly courses. Augustine, writing in North Africa, explained the conception on March 25 and the birth on December 25, leaning on the symbolism of equinoxes and the fullness of time. A small Latin tract on the solstices and the equinoxes from the 4th century does the same work, weaving theology and astronomy. The early Church did not drift in laziness. It calculated, argued, symbolized, and eventually celebrated. On the other side of the Mediterranean, Christians held to January 6. That date gathered the Nativity and the baptism into a single revelation feast. The Jordan waters and the Bethlehem cave belonged to one unveiling story. The Armenian Church carries this stream into the present, honoring the Nativity on January 6 because of that ancient Eastern memory. The calendar teaches theology. The dates do not only mark time, they tell a story. Meanwhile, the Gospels continue to insist on earthiness. Luke gives Mary and Joseph trudging south from Nazareth to Bethlehem, the ancestral town of David. A crowded house forces them to use the area where the family animals are kept at night, perhaps a cave or the lower level of a peasant home. The child is wrapped tightly, as any Jewish newborn would be, and laid in a feeding trough. That image carries no snow, no holly, no wreaths. It carries poverty and intimacy. Matthew moves the map to Jerusalem and plots a line from Persia or Babylon, where learned men watched the sky for royal signs. The caravan arrives under the nose of a murderous king. The violence that follows shreds any sentimentality. The flight to Egypt hums with deep Exodus echoes. That violence leaves a historical scar. Herod the Great's final years were paranoid and bloody. He executed sons and court rivals. He knew the empire well and built strongholds like Herodium and Masada, leaving monuments as big as mountains. Josephus recounts that Herod died after a lunar eclipse and before Passover. The event jammed a handful of complicated palace maneuvers into a small window. That is why the eclipse date matters. The 4 BCE eclipse has time to fit processions, mourning, palace intrigues, and decrees. The 1 BCE eclipse is total and dramatic, but perched closer to Passover, with tighter scheduling. 2 camps form around these options. The Nativity sits upstream from that death. That is why most reconstructions land the birth of Jesus in the last years before 4 BCE, or the very early 1 BCE. Option if one takes the later death. December 25 can live in those years without strain, but it is not the only viable square on the calendar. When modern readers hear that December 25 corresponds to a Roman solstice festival, suspicion rises immediately. And yet, the ancient Christians played a different game. They loved to raid pagan vocabulary and turn it inside out. The sun language in Christian hymnody is shameless by design. Christ is the Sun of righteousness. The rising sun from on high visits us. They were not shy about stealing imagery and baptizing it. That is not corruption. That is mission. In sermons, preachers in the 4th and 5th centuries could stand in cities ringing with sun talk and point to Bethlehem, saying that the true light does not simply climb back from the horizon. He takes on flesh and stakes a claim no solstice can imitate. The records also show Christians thinking with calendars, not just festivals. The West fixed the crucifixion on March 25. In the Roman imagination, that date lined up with the spring equinox, the balance of light and dark. A theological intuition linked creation, conception, and crucifixion to cosmic hinges. Time is not anonymous in that logic. Time carries fingerprints of God's plan. The Annunciation, when the Word took flesh in Mary's womb, belongs to the same sacred day as the cross. That day, counted forward 9 months, births December 22. The notation existed on parchment before the empire built the Sun Temple. The two systems reverberated rather than copy-pasted. In an eastern city, the figures are slightly different. April 6 soon became the favored date for the crucifixion. Count forward, and January 6 becomes the Nativity. Hence, an ancient calendar in the East set that as a liturgical constellation. The Epiphany or Theophany embrace shows why the Armenian Church never adopted December 25. The East held its own rhythm and did not need Rome's December. A third stream of reasoning adds Jewish specificity. The priestly rota in 1 Chronicles circulated across Jewish memory. It had been updated in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah to fit a rebuilt temple world. Luke naming Zechariah as a priest of the division of Abijah is more than color. It is a timeline hook. If one posits that the rota started each year in the first week of the month of Nisan, one can plot Abijah's service on the 8th week, plus interruptions for Passover and Shavuot. That places Zechariah's altar encounter in early summer. Elizabeth conceives soon after. 6 months later, Mary conceives. Count 9 months from that, and the birth falls in early autumn. Some reconstructions go further and align Jesus' birth to the Feast of Tabernacles, shoring up a rich symbol set. The language in John 1 that the Word pitched his tent among us glows even brighter in that setup. And in that region, the weather lines up with shepherding outdoors in the evening, without relentless winter rain. Those clean lines blur when one confronts the real complexity. The rota ran year to year with intercalations around lunar months. The course of Abijah served twice each year. The temple required all divisions for pilgrimage feasts. The Qumran calendar traditions diverged from mainstream priestly practice. Whether Zechariah's week fell in early summer one particular year is a model more than a known. The calculations demonstrate a plausible pattern and a beautiful symbol web. They do not announce an unshakable date. The fall nativity proposal remains serious and beautiful. It remains an inference, not a verse. Roman administrative habits add a layer of plausibility to Luke's census notice without forcing it into 6 CE. Egypt's papyri reveal a 14-year enrollment cycle that did not synchronize across the entire empire, but did produce regular local registrations. Judea, under a client king like Herod, could face an enrollment decree from Augustus to systematize property oaths and allegiance oaths. Luke's language about everyone going to his own city does not imply an empire-wide migration to ancestral towns. It can denote a localized, ancestral home framework in a heavily tribal society like Judea, where land claims tied to family records mattered. Mary and Joseph traveled because Joseph was of David's line, and the property link drew him to Bethlehem. not because Caesar in far-off Rome ordered every empire resident to move. Details like that quiet the uproar a little. The picture becomes legible again. That quiet does not drain the drama. The Magi from the East only make sense in a world where people read the sky with intense seriousness. Babylonian and Persian astronomers tracked planetary motions with exacting records. Jupiter, the king planet, touching Saturn in the sign associated by some with the land of the Jews, would light up their charts. Jupiter crowning Regulus in Leo, the lion associated with Judah in ancient symbolism, makes ancient celestial watchers sit up. Jupiter and Venus joining so closely as to appear one blazing lamp in summer twilight would pull any court astronomer outside. These were not fairy lights. They were real events that carried genuine ancient meanings. The Gospel of Matthew uses language that ancient astronomers used for stationary points in a planet's retrograde loop when it says the star stood over the place. The planet appears to halt and reverse against the star field because of the Earth's orbit dynamics. To ancient eyes and language, that was a star standing still. The modern mind wants crisp coordinates and hires a planetarium app. The ancient story gives luminous wayfinding in the language of its world. Quirinius pushes back into frame. The line in Luke remains a crux. The simplest reading points to 6 CE. The narrative's logic points earlier. The Roman historian Josephus details an upheaval in 6 CE as Judea shifted to a direct Roman administration, with Quirinius conducting a census and a revolt under Judas the Galilean flaring. Luke seems to be aware of that as a later notorious census. That strengthens the case that he wanted to mark the earlier enrollment as the first such registration. Greek wording can sustain that reading. The historical environment sustains it as well. Once releases the pressure to fall into 6 CE, the horizon opens again. Even with all of these gears turning, the most surprising piece remains: the early Christian refusal to obsess over birthdays. Origen's tart comment about birthday parties as pagan habits of kings underscores the distance. The emphasis lay elsewhere. The Nativity rose slowly to prominence as theological reflection on the Incarnation deepened. The feast did not begin as a historical reenactment pinned to a documented certificate. It began as the Church saying, with maximum joy and precision, that the Word became flesh. The date embodied meaning as much as it marked chronology. December 25, once adopted, did what feasts do. It shaped a season. Advent drew hearts into longing. Candles multiplied. Scripture readings narrowed and focused on prophecies and annunciations and visitations. Carols sounded. Evergreen branches spoke as parables in cold spaces. In the dark of the Northern Hemisphere's shortest days, the light theme carried visceral power. The Church did not aim for solar religion. It aimed for incarnation, and it used the natural stage of the season to preach. That sermonic instinct included bold appropriation. Pagan soldiers saluted Sol Invictus. Christian preachers stood in the same cities and announced that Christ, the Son of Righteousness, rises with healing in his wings. The lexicon overlapped on purpose. That was not concession. It was combat through poetry. If the sun returns after the solstice, Christians could say that the true sun conquered death and rose. If Saturnalia turned masters into servants for a day, Christians could point to the God who became a servant forever. The old stories were not brushed away. They were flipped. Evidence for an earlier Christian December 25 sits in texts like Hippolyta's commentary and the 354 chronography split entries. When Emperor Aurelian lit up Sol Invictus in 274, Christians in Rome were a determined minority. By the time December 25 showed up clearly in Christian calendars, the empire had shifted, and Christian bishops sat closer to the center. The fight over the winter date did not begin with Christians opportunistically grafting a birth feast onto a convenient solstice party. It began with Christians learning to read their own story in the rhythms of the created order. with equinoxes and solstices as cosmic metaphors, and with prophecy patterns guiding the pen. The fact that a mighty pagan festival also stood on that date made the Christian proclamation more pungent, not less. The alternative stream in the East anchored January 6 as theophany, the manifestation of God, with localized emphasis on either the nativity, the baptism, or both. That celebrates a different layer of the same truth. In the East, cold January nights hold a different set of observances. The holy fire leans over the Jordan in memory. The star over Bethlehem glows in the icon with a dark cave below. The unity of nativity and manifestation shapes the theology there. All of that leaves ordinary believers with a straight-faced reality. The Bible never hands out a date. The earliest Christians did not lock one in. The historical reconstructions offer a handful of plausible windows, with autumn favored by many who press the priestly rhoda and shepherding angle. December 25 and January 6 arise from theological math and early tradition, not a crib logbook. Saturnalia and Sol Invictus flared nearby in the Roman calendar, but Christian reasons for December 25 existed already and were sharpened in that contest. The exact day remains irreverent, unknown. That unknown does not flatten Christmas. It makes it honest. The feast celebrates a real event in a real year, under a real governor and a real tyrant, whose death can be dated to real eclipses. It celebrates a birth in a place that can be walked and measured and mapped. It stands under real stars. It admits that the paper trail for the exact day did not survive or never existed. It insists that the meaning is too large to be confined to one winter square on a commercial calendar. Inside the story, Mary and Joseph navigate a journey that feels painfully ordinary. A crowded family home, swaddling cloths folded on a manger, a first cry cutting the night. Outside, shepherds stand in the open and feel their hearts pound. Later, strangers from the east arrive, with the scent of spices and the shimmer of gold. Those are not inventions. They are the kind of details that leave footprints. Bethlehem's hills exist. The road to Egypt exists. The Jordan Ford exists. The cave church in Bethlehem amplifies memory, but the gravity sits in the gospel's groundedness, not in the limestone blocks. Historians who chase the Abijah timeline draw encouraging correspondences. John the Baptist aligns with springtime, perhaps even with Passover themes. Jesus arrives in the fall, with tabernacles waving palm branches and singing Hosanna around Sukkot, and the symbolism blossoms. Others defend a December birth, pointing to the possibility of constant shepherding near Migdal Eder, to administrative enrollments fitting winter, and to a line of early Roman Christian testimony favoring December 25 as a date known within the community. The best conclusion honors the strengths on each side and refuses to swagger. The winter defense leans on specific kinds of flocks and tasks. Bethlehem's proximity to Jerusalem made it a prime spot for raising sacrificial animals. Those flocks needed care through all seasons, and shepherds could be in the fields even on cold nights in December when rain was not falling. The air can be biting, but not lethal. Travelers who have slept under the winter sky near Bethlehem confirm the possibility. Luke's phrase that the shepherds were living out in the fields implies a season when they stayed outside. That pushes many toward months outside the peak rainy season, but does not forbid December if the weather turned dry. Naming the tower of the flock, Migdal Eder from the prophet Micah, adds depth. Rabbinic memory associates that area with flocks designated for temple use. The idea that shepherds keeping watch near Migdal Eder would be the first to hear of a newborn Lamb of God births a strong line of devotion. Scripture does not hand that identification explicitly, but the geography and memory align in a way that preachers and pilgrims have treasured. Again, the symbolism and the possible local practice stack up in a way that makes a December scene plausible, not guaranteed. The census detail, so often dismissed with a wave, becomes more intelligible with Roman and Jewish administrative habits in view. Augustus loved order and oaths. He boasted of securing the loyalty of peoples across the empire. Herod, a master political operator, prized Roman favor. Registrations of property and people could serve multiple purposes, including taxation and loyalty oaths. The idea that Joseph traveled to Bethlehem for a registration that recognized his ancestral property connections tracks with Judean genealogical habits. Inheritance in Jewish law and custom was not a simple matter of present residence. It tied to clans and ancestral lands. Luke narrates within that matrix. The picture of everyone moving across the empire at Caesar's command is modern imagination projecting a global bureaucracy backward. The real picture is hybrid and local. The Quirinius knot does not unravel completely. It tightens and loosens depending on how one reads Luke's syntax and how generously one fills the background with administrative flexibility. Ancient sources speak of multiple overlapping authorities in Syria and the East. Quirinius's earlier military campaigns near Galatia and his later governorship in 6 CE are both well attested. An earlier role in Syrian oversight is plausible. Luke's awareness of the notorious 6 CE census gives him a reason to specify that the Nativity-era registration was a first, earlier one. The argument does not bully anyone into submission. It clears enough room for Luke not to stand at odds with known history. The star remains a kindled riddle. Johannes Kepler, in the 17th century, calculated the triple conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in 7 BCE and linked it to a new star, perhaps a nova triggered in his mind by planetary alignment. Modern astronomy does not affirm that mechanism, but the triple conjunction itself is real and spectacular to a trained ancient observer. The Jupiter-Venus conjunction on June 17, 2 BCE tightened so closely that their disks nearly merged to the naked eye. That would arrest a Magus outdoors in the evening. The Jupiter-Regulus dance spread across months in 3 to 2 BCE could advertise a royal birth in the land associated with Leo and Judah. The Chinese record of a broom star around 5 BCE could fit Matthew's language about a star that arose and moved. Each candidate builds a mood of celestial significance during the likely years. None locks the calendar day. The heavens mark a season of awe. Herod's personality and politics add somber weight to the narrative. He built and murdered in equal measure. He rolled tax policy and temple projects into a career that baffled and impressed Rome. He died terrified that no one would mourn him and ordered notable men to be killed upon his death to generate tears in Judea. That order was not carried out, but it reveals the man's iron paranoia. The slaughter of Bethlehem's boys fits his profile. Bethlehem's population was small. The number of infants, under 2, would have been limited. The horror would have been intimate and local, not citywide. The lack of other sources recording that specific event reflects the scale, not the improbability. Matthew's detail rings with a ghastly accuracy to the man. The movement of the Holy Family to Egypt had practical logic. Egypt housed a large Jewish community, long established since the days of the Ptolemies. Travel routes existed. The distance made pursuit less likely. Prophetic echoes doubled the significance for Matthew. Out of Egypt, God calls his son. The story stands on the legs of geography and prophecy. It breathes the grit of the road. Liturgical time eventually embraced these movements. The Western 12 days from December 25 to January 5 formed a bridge to Epiphany on January 6. The arrival of the Magi was placed on Epiphany. The East kept January 6 as the birth and manifestation day in one. The difference does not fracture the core. It shows how calendars can preach in different accents. December 25's staying power comes from more than a Roman imperial accommodation. It comes from the way that date gathers strands of theology into a season of light in darkness. The equinox symbolism baked into the conception date gives December 25 a cosmic timbre. The season's silence amplifies the humility of the manger. A world stripped of harvest festivals and daily field labor in cold climates finds the space to sit with a story of incarnation. That is not ancient propaganda. It is pastoral wisdom at scale. Disputes over the proper date have often overlapped with debates about how Christians relate to culture. Some champion the fall nativity not only because of priestly rota math, but also as a way of distancing Christmas from perceived pagan ingredients. Others embrace December 25 precisely as a testimony to the Church's confidence in consecrating time. Both instincts belong in the family when handled with charity and historical honesty. Early medieval sources in the West echo and stabilize the December 25 date. Sermons and calendars fill with it. Nativity plays emerge much later and cement the imagery that the Church had always told. The scene, once felt in small house churches and then in basilicas, becomes common property. Even in the East, where January 6 remains central, December 25 enters some local calendars over time. The steel cords of tradition settle in. Calendars shift in the modern era and add complications. The Gregorian reform in 1582 corrected the Julian calendar's drift against the solar year. Many Eastern Orthodox churches retained the Julian reckoning for liturgical dates. That is why a nativity feast called January 7 appears on your wall calendar. It is December 25 in the Julian calendar, which presently lands on January 7 in the Gregorian. The same date in two systems, separated by 13 days, creates the illusion of a different feast. Under the hood, it is the same decision. The calendars do not disagree as to the underlying choice. They disagree about how to count solar years. The human heart tends to seek closure. It wants to write a line that says Jesus was born on X day of Y year under Z sky with these coordinates. The Gospels do not insult the mind. They fill the frame with names and places and signs. They refuse a birthday notation and let the Church fill it in with theological sense and pastoral wisdom. The decision to place the feast in December or early January is not a rollout of propaganda. It is a way of confessing that God entered human history, that this entry has cosmic meaning, and that this meaning cannot be exhausted in one night's candlelight. This leaves room for a reverent willingness to be surprised. The fall nativity reconstruction may one day receive fresh archaeological or textual support that tightens its case. The central point remains. The Feast of the Nativity celebrates that he came. The exact calendar day hides under a veil of time. The Church lifts the veil with faith and picks days that amplify the song. In the meantime, the clues continue to glint. Shepherds watching under cold stars. A priest's rota, placing the incense offering in a summer week that ripples forward into autumn gladness. An imperial calendar stacked with winter feasts. And a Christian feast of incarnation planted with fearless joy in the same ground. An emperor's sun god overshadowed by a child called the light of the world. Ancient astrologers reading a sky that really did put on a show in those very years. A mad king dying under an eclipse, with Passover pressing. A family stumbling toward Egypt, with the smell of frankincense trailing behind them. A Judean hillside that still rolls exactly as described. The mind can hold multiple alignments at once. December 25, as a theological culmination that predates Aurelian's temple and outlives it. January 6, as an Eastern voice honoring the manifestation. A fall nativity as a historically textured possibility. None of these annihilates the others. Each adds contour to the relief. The story remains durable. The child remains constant. The hidden truth about December 25 is not that it is a lie to be debunked. It is that the earliest church did not lean on a documentable birthday, but instead wove a date through Scripture's patterns and creation's rhythms, then sang it into being in basilicas and caves and homes. It is that Christians did not cower before the empire's solstice fires. They walked into that season and lit different candles. It is that a holiday, now weighed down with commerce and nostalgia, began as an audacious claim about God and flesh, time and eternity, and the manger itself refuses to perform tricks for a calendar. It is a feeding trough with a wrapped newborn placed inside. It anchors the scandal that God chose not a palace, but a peasant home's animal nook. It carries hay and the breath of animals. It sits under a roof while the sky outside whispers with stars. That is the heart. The date served the heart. The heart did not serve the date. Beyond ancient calculations and imperial festivals, the nativity story moves with a tenderness that history debates cannot dilute. Joseph, leading a donkey along a rocky path. Mary enduring labor in a place prepared with whatever warmth the household women could muster. A newborn's cry piercing a village asleep. A relative's home, packed and bustling because of a registration that upset the routine, making room where there was none. Ordinary acts of kindness brought out by an extraordinary moment. The Magi's journey is anything but ordinary. They come with a metric of time very different from Rome's fastidiously dated inscriptions. Their calendars are sky-led. Their learning is a woven fabric of mathematics and mythic associations. When they arrive, they testify that the heavens announce the arrival of a king. A planet slows in its path against the stars. To ancient eyes, it stands still. That behavior becomes a sign of arrival. That mental world does not undercut the truth of the event. It places it in its original lights. Herod's advisors know Micah's prophecy about Bethlehem. That town's name means house of bread. The bread of life arrives there with almost scandalous literalism. That detail was not lost on early Christian preachers. Symbolism pervades the record because symbolism pervades God's work in the world. Time and geography and astronomy swarm with meanings that meet at the manger. The drive to lock the birth into a single day for all time is more modern than ancient. Antiquity told time with communal feasts, with cycles of seasons, with memory-laden dates that anchored events to cosmos and worship more than to anniversary party fodder. A date like December 27th lived as a theological intersection. It answered the winter's darkness with a confession about the true light. It lodged the incarnation into the bones of a community with the help of the season's silence. That is not an evasion. It is an act of devotional genius. When preachers like John Chrysostom rose in Antioch to celebrate December 25, they did not do so with historical timidity. They argued from Roman records and priestly patterns. They roared that the day the church kept was not a novelty. They claimed it embodied a memory and a mystery. Even if their archive references did not survive or their calculations leaned on assumptions, they were not unscrupulous. They were pastors in a world where calendars were contested terrain. The sermons still rattle with confidence. Augustine in North Africa later explained the March 25 conception logic with pastoral clarity. He saw it as fitting that the one who made the sun and the moon should die, rise, and even be conceived at cosmic hinges. He framed December 25 not as borrowed light, but as created meaning. He placed the Nativity where it would preach year after year, with night drawing long and hearts turning homeward. The winter feast settled into villages and cities. It spread through Europe. It collected customs, some with roots in pre-Christian winter practices, and some with purely Christian origin. The evergreen, a humble tree that keeps its color when all else gray, became a living sermon. Candles multiplying in the dark became an act of protest against despair. Families gathered because the story demanded it. Gifts were given as shadows of the gift. These customs did not always arrive tidy. They arrived as time's sediment layered on the bedrock of a Bethlehem night. Scholars who champion a fall birth remind modern audiences that attachment to a specific date can be a crutch. They recalibrate the imagination by showing that the story breathes in the open air of the autumn hills, with harvest smells in the background, and the tabernacle festival raising tents in every yard. They show that Scripture's own lines may fit that frame beautifully. That corrective is not an attack. It is a gift. It rescues the Nativity from being only a winter postcard. It lets it grow into a larger biblical landscape. And yet, December 25 is not an accidental choice. It bears its own biblical and theological weight. It exists as an answer to a darkness that is larger than weather. It exists as a confession that the world's deepest winter can be interrupted by God's arrival. The date does not shrink with critical scrutiny. It deepens. It acquires layers of meaning that the first Christians stacked there, deliberately. The Roman world eventually bowed to a Christian story that re-threaded civic time. The old festivals did not disappear overnight. They were refitted in memory and meaning. Christian emperors did not merely decree new days. Pastors and people filled them with content. December 25 became a day on which even hard men paused. The unconquered sun became a piece of imperial nostalgia, while the worship of the newborn Jesus outlived the empire, the calendar reforms, and every critic with a quill. Modern believers stand in a curious position. They inherit a date that glows with history, controversy, poetry, and pastoral power. They also inherit a set of tools to analyze ancient calendars, priestly courses, political inscriptions, and astronomical phenomena. The two do not need to duel to the death. The meaning of Christmas does not require a notarized birth certificate. It invites the mind to play with the plausible windows, and the heart to kneel with gratitude. Under the microscope of scholarship, the Gospels not only endure, they deepen. Luke's Jewish specificity around Abijah, Matthew's Herodian realism, the geographical plausibility of journeys, the socio-political logic of a family being shoved into a corner during a registration, the literary echoing of Moses and Egypt in the flight, the measured astrology baked into the Magi's cameo. All of it holds. These details do not grant a December calendar box. They grant a bedrock of reality on which any reverent date can sit. There is a final, tender irony. In an age impatient for certainty, the refusal of the New Testament to supply a date feels inconvenient. It is actually a mercy. It allows the feast of the Nativity to transcend the scrap of paper on which someone might have scribbled a day. It allows the Church to choose days that amplify the message against the silence of winter, or alongside the waters of Epiphany, or with the tents of autumn. It allows a global family to celebrate in the dead of December snow and under equatorial heat with equal truth. It honors the universality of the Incarnation. The result is a tradition that wears its history on the surface without shame. December 25 can be explained with Roman festivals, solar metaphors, and Christian calculation. It can be critiqued with priestly schedules and shepherding habits. The two approaches can share the table. Christmas does not flinch. It grows larger in the mind and the senses. This winter, a person can stand outside under a cold sky and remember Saturnalia's laughter and Aurelian's sun priests. They can remember Hippolytus scratching at parchment and Chrysostom thundering in Antioch. They can remember shepherds tilting their heads upward and magi charting celestial loops. They can remember a frightened young couple tucking a newborn into straw. They can let all of that surge together without insisting on a single numbered square. The date carries intention rather than proof. The story carries proof of a different kind. Historians will continue to weigh Josephus's eclipse, to parse Luke's phrasing of the census, to re-examine the priestly rota with any new scrap of Qumran parchment, and to simulate sky maps from 7 to 2 BCE with planetarium precision. That work is part of loving the story with the mind. It honors the God who made time and stars. It refuses lazy myth-making. It keeps the church honest. Preachers and poets will continue to tell of the word pitched among us. They will elevate a December night, or a January morning, or an autumn evening into a locus of awe. They will retell the chronology with drama, the geography with earthy accuracy, and the theology with tears. That work is part of loving the story with the heart. It honors the God who took on our pulse and breath. Homes will continue to fill with evergreens and light. Tables will load with food. Voices will sing lines composed centuries apart across continents. Children will look toward a manger scene with wide eyes. Older faces set by decades will soften. The feast outlives its controversies, because it is a feast, not a footnote. Its goal is worship, not winning a debate. And yet the debate educates, and worship grows truer. One last angle invites respect. The Jewish calendar beats through the story of Jesus' life. Passover frames his death. Shavuot frames the outpouring of the Spirit. The fall festivals ring with themes that resonate with his kingship and his return. If the Nativity is placed in a way that reflects that rhythm, the symbolism swells. A fall birth at Sukkot would sing with meaning. A spring conception fits with prophecy patterns. A winter nativity glows with the Church's mission in a dark world. The spectrum adds glory in every direction. Christmas is, therefore, a celebration with an honest footnote. The historical evidence allows multiple landing zones. The Church's early mind chose December 2251. In the West, through a tapestry of theological and pastoral decisions, the East chose January 6 with equal conviction. Many modern reconstructions sketch a September or October birth. None of these stands as scandal. All stand as possible doors into the same stable. The message remains defiant and luminous. The Creator chose to be born. He did so under the rule of Augustus, with a local tyrant named Herod trembling. He did so at a time when stars told stories to men who listened. He did so at a place that can still be walked. He did so in a way that refuses luxury. He did so for the world. As the last candle drips and the last hymn fades, the calendar debates settle back into the background. A person might glance at a clock and remember that no gospel writer thought to note the day and the hour. The person might find that liberating. They might sense that the absence is purposeful, enlarging, kind. It allows the feast to be breathed rather than itemized. If a friend insists that December 25 was stolen from a pagan festival, one can answer calmly that the story is more complex and more beautiful. Christians in Rome had reasons of their own to cherish that date. Before Aurelian's temple glinted, they then used the overlap to preach Christ into a season saturated with rival meanings. If another friend insists that only a fall day preserves biblical honesty, one can answer with equal calm that the priestly rota argument is rich but not definitive, and that winter shepherding in Bethlehem has defenders too. The Church can love the evidence and keep the feast. History is not a threat to wonder. It is a partner. It shows that Jesus' birth happened in a world as tangled and complex as ours, full of politics and pride, calendars and clocks, shepherds and scholars. It shows that God moves in public datable time, under watchful eyes and real stars. It shows that the Church's instinct to fix a birthday in order to fix its own gaze is a human and holy move. Christmas comes, whether on December 25 or January 6, or a fall evening in your historical imagination. The child lies in a manger. The sky is very real. The town is small. The empire is large and indifferent. The drama is cosmic. The date is chosen to preach that drama into hearts that need it. The best way to honor the hidden truth about December 25 is to let it humble and widen the celebration. The feast is more than a day. It is the claim that history's Lord joined history. The calendars can argue. The child remains.